All right, the recording has started. So welcome once again to this webinar organized by the I-LINC project. Today's topic is Coding Bootcamps, a strategy for youth employment in developing countries, and our presenter is Maria Garrido. I hope I pronounced it well. If not, please, yeah, you're free to correct me. And yeah, just a few words about Maria before giving the floor to her. So she's a research assistant professor at the University of Washington and a visiting research at the Social Research Center of the Technical University of Dortmund. And she will present to us the topic in a presentation which would last perhaps between 25 and 30 minutes. And then we'll have a question and answer session. Of course, if you have any questions and you can think of something on the spot, please feel free to share it in the chat, and then we will address it, or if Maria wants, then she can address it right away during her presentation. Just a few practicalities. So your microphones are muted now in order to avoid background noise, and we will do the same when we are not speaking. And yeah, once again, please use the chat to address questions, even if they're technical questions or if you have technical problems. And make sure you address the questions to all participants in the chat. You can ask questions to single persons in the chat, but if you would like everyone to see the question that you're posing, then please use the all participants option. So as I mentioned, there would be a recording of this webinar so that we can share the presentation afterwards. And for those that are active on social media, you can use the I-LINC hashtag and the handle to share questions and ideas. So now I give the floor to Maria. I will just pass her the presenter role right now, and Maria, please try after that to navigate through the slides.
I can. I have now. Yes.
Okay.
Well,
yes.
Much for your Thank you very much for inviting everybody to the web. Since small group, if the session is interactive, so please feel free. I'll have my chat open. Feel free to ask questions and engage in a discussion with me while I was navigating through the presentation. For some reason, I cannot pass the slides from Islava. I don't know why.
You have to go to the next file, because the first file is just the welcome page.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, now we can. Thank you.
Okay.
So once again, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction of how this research came about. This research was financed by the International Telecommunications Union, and as you may know, it's a United Nations organism, institution that is primarily working on the area of information and communication technologies. So they wanted to understand the extent to which coding bootcamps that have become very popular in the US and Europe and other developed countries, if that can be a model for youth strategy in less developed countries, and if so, what were the elements of these coding bootcamps that could help foster youth employability. And although the research was done primarily in less developed countries, we consider initiatives in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We also included many initiatives from Europe, so that would be relevant for everybody in the chat if I assume that everybody comes from one of the European Union countries or the neighboring countries around Europe, and the US as well. So there are three main objectives of this work. One was to map this recent emerging of coding bootcamps in middle and low-income countries, to assess the training elements from curriculum development to the types of skills they have, the length of the training, etc., and how they contribute to learning and employment outcomes. And then the third one, which will be the main outcome of this, to draw a list of recommendations for the ITU to consider coding bootcamps as a strategy for employment. So just a quick note on how we did the research. We did this research in over 40 coding bootcamps, as I said, from many different regions in the world, and we interviewed 25 providers to understand the characteristics of the training programs, their employment services, their partnerships they develop in order to increase the employment opportunities that the trainee in these programs have, and also the challenges, right? Is there any question to hear? I think I can continue. So what is a coding bootcamp? Coding bootcamp takes very different forms and shapes. Depends on the length, depends on the objective, depends on many things. But in general, the ones that we consider for an employment strategy that is short term, are intensive, 3 to 6 months in person, although there's some blended learning in terms of online classes for people with no prior experience or little experience in coding, in programming, to improve their programming skills, to reach junior developer jobs in different programming languages. So that's the definition of the bootcamp we included, that we focus on, although not solely, as you will see in the presentation. There are, I think, some considerations in terms of considering this type of training as a strategy for employability for you. In reality, coding bootcamps are not new. Coding bootcamps have been a way in which professionals in the IT industry have updated their skills historically. But what is very new and innovative about the current model is the fact that these coding bootcamps are designed for people that have no IT backgrounds, right? People that have no experience in programming, no knowledge of algorithms or programming languages or anything like that. So I think the innovative way is trying to bring up the skills of a group of people that have no knowledge of programming to the level where they can practice as junior programmers. That's the big difference between this type of coding bootcamp and the bootcamp that have existed in the IT industry before. As we all know, code governs what computers do, and computer science degrees, I mean, are still the gold standard to become a software developer. So coding bootcamps are not a replacement of computer science degrees. However, they are a way to rapidly improve the skills of people so they can join the labor market in the IT front. And that's something that is incredibly needed because there's a huge shortage. And as you know, I think that if I remember correctly, the number of jobs that the European Union forecasts that will go unfilled because people don't have the right skills on the IT front is almost 1 million jobs. So it's important, and especially considering the context of Europe today, where there's very high level of youth unemployment, especially in southern Europe, Portugal, Spain, Italy, etc., Greece. I think the interesting part of this is the fact that it brings people with no knowledge of programming to become from users of technology to technology creators, even if it's at a very basic level. Another interesting consideration that we saw in the time of the research is that for women and young girls, especially for women who are about to enter already in the labor market but want to improve their employment opportunities, coding bootcamps may offer a new path towards employability and towards different types of jobs that they don't have access right now. There are many bootcamps, as you will see later, that actually focus on women and trying to bring women up to speed in programming so they can join that labor force if everything goes all right. And as you know, there's a huge gender discrepancy in the IT industry, and in the United States it's around 80 to 20%, 80 dominated by men, especially at levels of software creation and leadership. I'm not sure if in Europe is very much the same, but maybe goes along the same line, 70, 30, 80, 20. So coding bootcamps can represent an important tool for women to be able to enter that market. And then as the last point, a consideration, is the coding skill can actually help less developed countries, but I also think it's important in the European context to modernize youth labor force, right? So this is the context and the considerations. Just a little bit of context in case you don't know much about coding bootcamps. I didn't before joining this research. I had heard of them before, but not to this extent. The coding bootcamp in this form started in the US in 2011 as a response to two trends. One, an increased demand of software developers across all economic sectors, so not only IT, but IT, health, government, etc. And the second trend, a somewhat slow evolution of the curriculum in computer science, where perhaps the time that it takes to prepare a computer scientist for a formal degree does not respond to the needs in the market where developers are needed today. So that's the two trends that feed this innovative form of training. I'll open the chat in case there's any questions. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Today, in the US and Europe and Australia and Canada, there's around 67 to 80 coding bootcamps. Still difficult to measure because there's not a lot of documentation of the coding bootcamps that are around. In the US, at least, and in Canada, there have been over between 16 and 20,000 students that have graduated. 75% of them have found a job, and please take these numbers with a grain of salt because these numbers are self-reported by the coding bootcamps themselves. There's no third-party checking on these numbers, and in some of these coding bootcamps, women make up almost 40% of the student population, and starting 2013, 2013-14, there has been a spread of this form of training in less developed countries from different ranges, middle income in particular, but also some lower income countries, but most of them in middle income countries, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Philippines, countries in that South Africa, in that development bracket. This is a little bit of a view of what it takes, the different forms of coding bootcamps, and this will become a little bit clearer in the next slide. But there are different coding bootcamps, as I said, that vary in length and in types of training, and also in the links they provide for people to find employment. And you know, there's many ways in which people are learning coding today, from self-taught through Code Academy or other types of training MOOCs, some others that are a little bit more structured, but still not to the level of certain coding bootcamps where you can actually get a job as a developer. And hopefully in the next third slide, I think this will become a little bit clearer. In the market, the most popular languages today that are relevant are by far Ruby, and this is driven by digital media services, primarily online websites, blogs, etc. So all the fronts and backs of website infrastructure, that's one of the main programming languages. JavaScript is also very popular, along with Python. So those are the three most popular programming languages, and this is also, I mean, this is the same landscape that you will find in less developed countries. So Python, Ruby, Java, and Python in that order seem to be the three most popular languages that are taught, including in the coding bootcamp that we research in Europe. It's also the same landscape in terms of the programming language. And then, as you know, there's a huge crisis of unemployment, and it's not only a matter of developed versus less developed countries. This is something that many countries are struggling with, and so they are turning around, looking at coding bootcamps to see if this could contribute to some extent to at least certain percentage of the population to be able to get the right skills to participate in the IT bloom. An important consideration that I forgot to mention is that, sorry, I'm looking at the chat, from ICT, also job requirement. Basic ICT, I'm responding to questions right now, sorry that I hadn't seen that. Of course, there's an assumption that people that actually, based on, I think that the coding bootcamps, and you will see I hope that by the end of this webinar, are not for all types of young people, right? These are young people that have certain level of basic ICT skill knowledge. So I think coding bootcamps are targeted for people that have passed that basic ICT requirement, Bastian. I think that from that perspective, bootcamps perhaps are better targeted for that niche of youth population that have already basic ICT skills knowledge. I hope this answered your question. I think that coding bootcamps, at least in the form of the 3 to 6 months type of training, intensive training, is not designed for people with no basic ICT skills. And then thank you, Bastian. And then Karen, yes, sure. Actually, the report at the end, we put a link of the report, so you can see a little bit more detail of the report in the link. And the report is available for everybody's public. So this is the IT employment outcome in different countries, especially on the front. One important programming skill that I forgot in many countries is very important is app development. Android and iOS in particular, that's another important skill, especially because, as you see here, the spread of the app industry is going across every single market: Asia, Europe, North America, South America, of course, with different levels of development, but it is very important. So in terms of considerations for policy and program development, and I will move next to the actual characteristics of the coding bootcamp. Apparently, you know, before I continue, there's something very interesting about all these environments. Everybody speaks about a coding skills shortage. There's no data on that shortage. And we looked everywhere, not everywhere, but we exhausted every single type of resource and possibility to understand what exactly shortage means when they say, the same with the European Union, when they say, you know, there's 800,000 jobs that will go on field if people don't have the right skills. Well, that's great, but what types of skills are you looking for in these 800,000 people? And ICT specialist skills is not really specific, right? So one of the biggest differences, I think, in terms of understanding the shortage is the fact that there is no data. The data is very generic. So one important consideration. However, if we follow what everybody talks about in terms of the trends, then there's an opportunity to impact on employment through this type of training, right? So even if it's for a smaller, and I think I'm going to Bastian's question, even if it's for a smaller portion of the youth population, smaller person that will get employed, and perhaps does not have those opportunities, important. As I said, you will see later on, bootcamp is outcomes, and depending on the lens, depending on how well structured the program is, relationships to employers, and the format, and the relevant content, and I think coding bootcamp, if you allow me to use this word, has become, you know, this form of has become for using coding bootcamps as a way for, but well, there's very different impact will get depending on and the length and the on the process available to. It's a very important consideration. And I think that what another important consideration in the training is the coding usually on an ecosystem of a tech system. Where these bootcamps thrive is in areas that are number one urban and number two they happen to be technology hubs. It started in San Francisco, right, in Silicon Valley, the biggest technology hub, continuing in Seattle, in Boston, in London, in Madrid. So these are forms of training that happen to be more relevant in context where there's a ecosystem presence. Sorry, I'm trying to follow. If I can get somebody else. Oh, is the sound getting poor? Is it better now?
It's just from time to time, but now we can. At least I can hear you well.
Is it better like this? Should I stop using the headphones? Everybody can hear me now.
I can hear you. Yeah.
And I'm looking at the. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Great, thank you. I apologize for that. So if you look at the the different types of boot camps, we found 4 types of boot camps that are relevant in the context of less developed countries, but are also present in more developed countries in Europe, in the US and Canada and Australia. The ready-to-work boot camps that are more aligned with the definition that I shared with you at the beginning. These are intensive, full-time, sometimes part-time, but intensive training between 3 and 6 months. That is, it's called Rapid Skills Training Program, where students have the opportunity to develop those skills from beginning to end, as I said, to reach those junior developer jobs. There's another type of model that is called Bootcamp Plus, that is mainly right now visible in Africa, and those are boot camps that combine not only training in programming, but also the types of skills, include entrepreneurship skills, financial understanding, business management. So they are triggered more towards entrepreneurship, but they are longer. They are usually between 1 to 2 years long. And then mini bootcamp model, which are probably the most common ones, happen to be 1 day or a weekend, a week training programs that are used especially to raise awareness about coding bootcamps, perhaps trigger interest of other different people, especially younger people in coding. And these coding bootcamps are not a vehicle for employment. They're just a vehicle for raising awareness and having a basic understanding of what programming means. Although in some cases, there are mini bootcamps that are used by professional IT workers to update their skills, but this is the minority. And then the last one, which is the early education model, which actually I think the European SchoolNet is working on a project in trying to bring in coding skills at the school level. So those are like the different four types of bootcamps. We focus on the first 2, Ready to Work and the Bootcamp Plus, because in terms of employability goals, they are either short or medium term. If you see, this is a little bit of the different coding bootcamps models in less developed countries. And as I said, this is also relevant in the context of more developed countries. The intensive, they are usually 3 to 6 months. The salary is really vary depending on the country, but it's in a range of within $10,000 to $13,000 a year. Is the salary that people get in these types of jobs, junior developer jobs. In the Bootcamp Plus, which, as I said, is 1 to 2 years longer term. And I think if you look at this slide, it becomes a little bit clearer. So depending on the type of bootcamp, bootcamps have to be contextualized in the continuum of employment or employability, right? Ready to work bootcamps are a short-term strategy in terms of these are 3 to 6 months. People get jobs usually within 3 months if the training is appropriate and the training program offers those links to employability. Bootcamp Plus is a little bit of a medium term in the employability continuum, 1 to 2 years. And then, of course, the early education model, which is a longer-term strategy for kids. The mini bootcamp model can play a role in every single one of the continuum, at the short, at the medium, or at the long term. And I'd like to stop here just to make sure people don't have any questions. Sometimes I get excited, and I think Bastian knows me, and I speak English at the speed of Mexican Spanish. So please let me know if there's any question or something that wasn't clear from my previous. I think we have one question. Okay, perfect. So so let's start with the characteristics of the training program. So who are the students in these training programs? And of course, this is by no means representative. This is just a profile of the kind of students that were part of the bootcamps that we documented. They are between 25 and 35 years old in that range. Depending on the type of bootcamp, the participation of women goes along between 25 and 40%, with different variations, not only regarding region, but it could be in Spain, for example, one of the programs has 50% of women participating just because of the kind of program, but that is not the case in other places. These are youth that many of them come with a university degree, not all of them. There are certain coding bootcamps that actually are designed for people who did not have the opportunity to go to a university. And some of them come with some professional experience as well. That doesn't make it less relevant. These are still youth that are in precarious employment, right? Most of them come to the boot camps as a means to find a better job for themselves. In terms of, you remember when I started, we wanted to look at the characteristics of the boot camps, the types of training programs they offer, how they organize. We didn't interview the students at the coding bootcamps, which would have been the natural step. So this is just an overlook of how the coding bootcamps work from the organizational perspective. There are different types of organizations involved in the coding bootcamp landscape: commercial, there are social enterprises as well, and non-for-profit. And depending on the type of organization, they use a variety of revenue streams, from student tuition, student contribution to the organization after they're employed. Some of the coding bootcamps agreements with the companies that hire their graduates, and the employers pay a hiring fee, which is another form of revenue stream. There's in-house recruiting, licensing of the curriculum, and donations. And the donations are specific, are of course naturally more relevant for those non-for-profit organizations. An interesting element of the coding bootcamps, and once again, we're discussing primarily coding bootcamps that are in the short and medium-term employability strategy, so ready-to-work bootcamps and bootcamp plus. They have a very strict recruiting screening process, so it's not open for everybody just because people are interested in programming. You have to pass certain tests and an interview process, and usually allows organization to assess the profile of the students, if they are inclined to have logic skills and develop an understanding of what programming is, usually with a very short coding test in Code Academy. And then, of course, the selected applicants are invited to an interview. This is an interesting consideration, and unfortunately, I don't have the chance to ask you, and I don't know which sector you represent or where you're coming from in terms of your interest in coding bootcamps, but this is usually coding bootcamps run in small groups. These are not big groups, so usually between 16, 20, 25, the biggest that we found. So the recruiting process is very important, and it's very important for many reasons. It's very important because that's the way the organizations, especially commercial organizations, but also non-for-profit, can guarantee that bringing in, not guarantee, but can increase the likelihood that bringing in the right, if you wish, candidates can actually clear the path for them to find a job. Educational sciences, and Karen is asking educational sciences, and I have actually taken part in a 3-month intensive programming bootcamp myself. Oh, that's great, Karen. I'd love to hear your experience. So you come from educational sciences and you have taken part of a coding bootcamp, and I'd love to know what coding bootcamp did you attend, and it was 3 months training, that's what you said, right? Okay, interesting. I'd love to hear your experience if you would like to share it with us whenever you find appropriate, and see if what I'm describing is actually relevant and according to your experience. Thank you for sharing that. For some of them, as I said, this is an important consideration for many reasons, not only because women deserve to be more employed than men, and I think women and men both deserve to be employed, but in the context of the IT industry, and if Karen is kind enough to share her experience with us, women are not very active in this field for many reasons, from cultural reasons, for the way computer science degrees are and engineering are designed. And Karen is actually agreeing with me, is very true, and unfortunately, in terms of, I said, of employment, women do not have a big presence in the IT industry. I mean in the IT industry, not from different positions in business, in education. I mean creation of technology. That is where women can actually play a bigger role. And you see here the difference in women participating in different coding bootcamps. I think this is interesting, but the more interesting part is why are certain coding bootcamps more successful in bringing women, and how are they doing it, and why? And if this program elements is something that other coding bootcamps can adopt to provide opportunity for women that are interested in this type of career to pursue this employment path. And I think one of the biggest issues that the organizations face is there's not a lot of awareness about this form of training among women. And Karen is sharing that there were 5 women and 15 people, 5 women out of 15 men in her group, and the representation of 5 women was considered by the group very large, and I think that's probably the case of many other groups. Karen, thanks for sharing that thought. So raising awareness is one of the aspects, and program design is another one, right? One of them is to develop models to sponsorship, for sponsorship to cover tuition. They can help. If it is an intensive training, and I'm not sure if, Karen, your training was full-time or part-time, but many of the coding bootcamp programs are full-time, which makes it impossible for women and men both. They have to earn a living, to quit everything and just do intensive training in a 3 to 6 months training. For the current one was full-time intensive. So this is very similar to the ones that we documented. And now many of the bootcamp providers are starting to develop part-time bootcamps. They're also intensive, but they are part-time. And they are designed to care for women especially, but also for some men that have family responsibilities. So those are 2 kinds of strategies that bootcamps, the bootcamps are using to bring in more women. So that's from the women's perspective. The cost vary dramatically, and I'm not sure what was Karen's experience, but some of these coding bootcamps, especially the commercial ones, are really expensive. In the US, I think it's along the lines of between, I believe, $10,000 and $15,000 for a coding bootcamp. In Europe, runs along 3,000 to 7,000 depending on the type of training. Of course, the non-for-profit ones are usually free or subsidized for students, but that's not the majority of the cases. So there are different ways in which these organizations are trying to help students to come in. So from students paying from their own funds, which is, of course, impossible for the vast majority of youth from 25 to 35. It will be even impossible for me that I've been working for certain periods of time. So they are prohibitively expensive. But sometimes they are free with the use of scholarships, and this is one of the strategies that they have used to bring in women because of the low representation. There are different strategies for payment and payment credit agencies. I mean, there's a whole range of mechanisms in which organizations are helping or facilitating, more than helping, facilitating students to come to coding bootcamps. And if you think about it from the perspective of, once again, I cannot talk to you, so I don't know if you come from social organizations, but the work that I do is with people that do not have the means to participate in coding bootcamps that cost this amount of money. I'm responding to Karen that has another question. She said that during her interview process for the screening, she was for the screening process for the bootcamp, there was it's an expensive affair, so I believe them to be rather exclusive for the time being. I think I agree with you, at least of those bootcamps that are commercial and they offer very opportunities with no means access. With only few scholarships available. I think that from that perspective, I completely agree with you, Karen. I think that from the time being, with very little exceptions, they are rather exclusive, especially those bootcamps that are, as I said, covered. Thank you, Bastian. I think Bastian needs to leave. Thank you for participating. Thank you for joining. She said, Karen also joined, shared that in her team, there were people being sponsored to various degrees by various organizations, exactly. And I think that's one of the main models that we saw, the companies actually, or organizations that needed people with certain types of skills actually paying for the training for them to come back and work in the organization. So that was one of the models that we saw that perhaps can make this type of model a little bit less exclusive, although still exclusive, but a little bit more open. An important thing to consider for the point of view of employment is that all of these coding bootcamps, regardless of if they are commercial or social enterprises or NGOs, social organizations, they place a lot of an effort to be able to connect people to the employment, to the labor market through different means, either by training of from interview training, interview skills, to preparing their portfolio, to actually having specific connections to certain industries or companies that come and recruit at the coding bootcamp. So the component of job services is very important, especially if you assess these type of training programs from an employability perspective. Providing the training is great, but providing the training has to be accompanied of a comprehensive employment services in terms of assessing the impact of this type of training in employment. Without this basket of services, it will be complicated because you will have only part of the picture of the skills, but the connection needs to be there. I think just to leave a space for discussion, I think it's important to raise awareness about the different forms of training in the coding bootcamp world that we identify for, and how each can contribute to employability in the short, medium, and long term. I think it's important also to identify stakeholders that can actually serve as hubs for this coding bootcamp training, from hubs to incubators to co-working spaces, centers, labs, etc. Interesting thing that I think needs to be considered, and I think this is probably more important at the policy level, but there needs to be a standard in the way coding bootcamps, especially commercial, report on employment outcomes, because there's no third-party validation of the data they share when they say they have 95 employment rate after people graduate. Well, what does that mean? Employment rate means they are employed for 3 months. It's a temporary employment. It's a long-term employment. What kind of jobs? With what kind of security and safety nets and benefits, etc. And I think that's something that in the concept of coding bootcamp for employability is important to consider. And I like to stop here. The links to the bootcamp, to the report is right there, Karen, at the end, and I'm happy to open the door in the chat to any questions. Yes, I think, Karen, that one of the biggest issues about employment outcomes is, once again, there's no standard way in which coding bootcamps today, especially if you think about it from a commercial perspective, I think it's valid for all of them. But from a commercial perspective, coding bootcamps are not certified. And what I mean they are not certified, they are not officially certified. And actually, many coding bootcamps in the US, and I'm not sure what is your experience, Karen, but the ones that we interview in Europe as well, have not gone through formal accreditation, because formal accreditation for them means that they cannot react to change curriculum at the pace of technology change. So they are not accredited. And so really in practice, their best, if I could say, a form of accreditation is the quality of their training and the quality of the graduates. So it's very important for them to have that component of employment being high, because if they can prove that they can actually train people that is not officially certified in the accreditation sense, but they are getting employment, well, it's a huge impact in their business, right? However, there are no standards in which they, as I said, in which they report this training. And I think Karen said that they are now playing with digital budgets. digital badges, I'm sure. And now Karen has developed a link to in the accreditation system. There are some they're trying to form links to the accreditation system, but I think so far the only one that has officially been accredited as a coding as a form of training is in Australia by the accreditation agency. Everywhere else, they are still in discussions, but they have not been able to identify a model where the accreditation system allows coding bootcamps to constantly update their curriculum. And as I'm sure Karen can tell us from her own experience, technology skill, I mean, the programming languages change, the basics don't, but there are always different things to learn. So I think that's something that it's a little bit of an obstacle. Oh, okay, sorry. I misunderstood Karen. She said, which one is that? You said that I meant they created one on LinkedIn, but their own. Okay, they created a form of accreditation in LinkedIn, not accreditation system as in the official government systems, just for the participants to be able to show, and I'm reading for her chat, to be able to show that they develop a junior developer qualification. So if I understood correctly, I'm sorry, Karen, I misunderstood you. The coding bootcamp that you attended developed their own accreditation system through LinkedIn to guarantee that to be able to show for participants to be able to show that accreditation on LinkedIn. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks for the clarification. And I like to open the floor to any more questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Maria, for this nice presentation. It was very interactive. That's very nice. I really like, from your presentation now, I'm really even more interested in the topic and to see how this develops further. I have one question which is related to employers and their perception of coding bootcamps, because you said that sometimes organizations and companies, they participate and then they support participants of coding bootcamps, but what about those that are not really in contact with coding bootcamps and are still looking for people who are skilled and have ICT skills? Do you think they appreciate people who have gone through coding bootcamps, or this is still something that has been seen with some reservations?
Once again, this is more my opinion than actual proof of that. I think there are two aspects of that question. Very good question. Thank you very much, Tomislava. Most, if not all, of the people who have created these coding bootcamp models, from commercial to social enterprises to social organizations, all of them come from the IT industry. All of them. So they have an automatic connection to that industry. Actually, many of them, the first bootcamp that was created was HackerU, was created by a group of software engineers that were looking for other people that could program at a junior level, and they couldn't find that. So they decided to create a training program that will help people with no skills to bring them up to this minimum level. So I think that almost there's a de facto connection of the people that are behind these coding bootcamp models in this form, not all of them, of course, to the IT industry. That's an important consideration when you think about developing networks and having companies that come and look at the trainees that you have as a source of labor, and that's an important consideration. I think that in things that happen everywhere, not only in these more developed or less developed, I still think that people in companies, like you said, still are wary of this form of training, especially because it is not certified. So even though hiring practices are changing and now there's new ways, especially for these types of jobs in which people interview, where instead of just talking to people, you are actually sitting down with a senior developer and working together on a coding challenge. I still think that the certificate or that accreditation is very important, and that is even more important in the context of less developed countries. So that credential, that license, that title of having something that is accredited by an institution they recognize is still important. So I think it's going to take time for the entire industry, well, the industries that are affected or that are reliant on IT and this type of programming skills, to be able to consider this form of training a valid form of training. But I think they are going to be forced to recognize it in the sense that if the skills shortage is actually that acute, and professional or university degrees cannot graduate students at the pace of the jobs available, and perhaps they will look into this type of training with a little bit less concern. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Thank you very much for the detailed answer. It would be really interesting to see how these develop, because in my opinion, there are two ways of going. Either they would become perhaps as an they develop certification schemes, and they become in a way alternative to computer science master programs, let's say, or they just become as an additional requirement, perhaps at one point, 2 degrees, so that people really prove that they have some practical experience. It would be very interesting to see how they develop.
Although I don't think, at least from the ones that we interview, I don't think they consider themselves a supplement. They don't consider themselves replacing formal education. It's just a different form of education, if I can say this. And actually, as I said, in both, not all of them, with the exception of 5 of the 20 programs, most of the students that come to the coding bootcamp already have university degrees, just in different, either some education in university, some university education, or graduated from education from university degrees. Not all of them, as I said. I think I'm just reading from Karen's comment, which I think is very, very relevant. It's a different style and pedagogical approach to skills gain. And I think that's in that newness of being a different type of training and a different approach to teaching and learning, where there might be some potential for this form of training in the future. What was your experience, Karen, in the training? If you don't mind sharing a little bit with us, were you able to? Your objective was to find a junior developer job, and I'll let her to answer if there are other questions in the meantime. But that's an important consideration. This is a new form of training. It's not replacing university education. It's not meant to be in any way or form. I think this is just simply a new path, or not a new path, a different path towards employment. And as I said, and I think I agree with Karen, there's a component of it that excludes some people already, from the financial point of view, also from the type of learning. So Karen said that she chose to do it to enhance her skills for research objectives and technological capacity for personal gain. Yeah, I understand. So she did it just to improve her skills in relationship to research objectives and technological capacity for personal gain. So those are her 2 objectives. And I think, as I said, and I agree completely with her, this cannot be looked as a replacement, because it is not. It's a very different form of training. And Karen said that it was indeed very intensive, and I'm not sure what was your experience, Karen, but the ones that we interview usually is in-class training between 6 to 8 hours plus homework. And she said that it was very intensive, and she was doing it alongside work and had homework as well. So and she said that her time in the classroom was about the same, 6 to 8 hours plus homework plus live demonstrations in the evening. And something that I like to add following the classes that had demonstrations in the evenings, that I like to add to Karen's comment on a new form of training. One of the elements that we documented from all of these bootcamps that they share with us is that they try to reenact as much as possible, and I don't know if that was your experience, Karen, they try to reenact as much as possible a working environment in the training. in teamwork in weekly projects, and and then they bring speakers, like Karen was saying, they brought some fantastic talks and entrepreneurs, and to be able to, for people to connect to people that were already working in this area, and they were pairing people and rotating, and so they tried to reenact an environment of work as much as possible. And so she said that they were paired, and those pairs rotated, and they took on different challenges depending by the day, different coding challenges. And that's the way they try to, so going back to her very important point, it's just a very different way and pedagogical approach to training. And she said that the last 2 weeks, it was self-driven application development, followed by pitching to live audience and investors. So they have that component. We read that in some of the other coding bootcamps, that they actually brought people at the end of the training, investors, like in the case of Karen, live audience, to be able for people to sell their ideas or to pitch their ideas to actual investors. So as you see, this is a form of training that is very different from just going to a class, getting the skills, going home, and it's a very different pedagogical approach, as Karen mentioned. And Karen said that for her, a huge strength on this form of training is that it gives you a step in the entrepreneurial community and the tech community. At least for her, that was the case in Brussels. She said that she was able. I mean, this form of training allowed her to step in the entrepreneurial community and the tech community, and that's a very difficult network to penetrate. So that's an important contribution of this form. Completely agree with you. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. That these are important networks that can open windows to the communities that are not necessarily open to everybody. And she said that in her experience, she was able to find a wonderful new community that you were part of and included within. So that's a very important component of this form of, like she said, different style of training and the pedagogical approach. It's not only about the skills you get, but it's the skills you get and the connections you make to communities that are close to, for most of us, if you don't have a way to open those windows or those doors. She said that she agrees that it's difficult to penetrate if you are not somehow brought, and even more so, and if you are not brought in through one of these trainings or other forms, through connections inside, and even more challenging if you are a woman in technology. So, and that's something that as I said at the beginning, I think that that could be an important contribution of this form of training. Is like, as you said, Karen, the experience of other women compares to yours, where you were able to get the skills, and also that access to those communities that can open more opportunities and a new path to employment, if that's the objective of women participating in bootcamps. And I think we don't have any more questions unless there's somebody else that.
I think, yes, we don't have any more questions, and it's already 7.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you very much.
We can end the webinar here. Thank you, Maria, for a very interesting presentation and for a very interactive discussion. Yes, you're receiving some positive feedback in the chat.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing your experiences, and Ryan and Bastian for participating, and Tomislava too. She's just as a comment, she said that the access is very important, and continue building those skills. I think it's definitely one that you have to continue working on. And thanks to all of you. That was a wonderful, wonderful audience and great questions. Thanks for being part of it, and thanks for the opportunity to I-LINC and Tomislava.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you for a very nice conclusion to this webinar. So have a good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining. We'll share the recording of the webinar later, perhaps in the beginning of next week, so more people will be happy to listen to the presentation of Maria. And once again, thank you and goodbye.
And thank you. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to email me. I'll be happy to learn from your experience as well. Thank you, and have a nice night.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.